Why was she the only one not speaking when the briefing room erupted into shouting? The map glowed red under flickering lights. Mountains, grid lines, enemy arrows drawn thick and angry, orders barked back and forth, men arguing over contingencies, timelines, failure points, and in the corner of the room, Sergeant Alexis Thorne stood completely still. Not ignored, worse than that. Dismissed. She felt it the way you feel cold before you notice you're shivering. The glances that passed over her. The way her name never came up when roles were assigned. The unspoken assumption that she was there to observe, not act. Too dangerous, they'd said earlier. Too risky. Too untested. Alexis had learned long ago that those words were often code for something else. Captain Brock Kincaid paced in front of the table, voice tight. Firebase Vanguard was under threat. Intelligence suggested a coordinated attack, not random, not sloppy, planned. The kind of planning that meant someone on the inside had been talking. Snipers were assigned, positions locked. Alexis said nothing. She could feel the weight of the rifle case leaning against the wall behind her, the one she wasn't supposed to touch. Her chest tightened, not with fear but with something heavier. The familiar ache of knowing the truth before anyone else, and knowing no one wanted to hear it. She thought of her father, Colonel James Thorne, a man who'd believed that if you did your job well enough, the system would protect you. It hadn't. The briefing ended, chairs scraped, orders flew, boots moved with purpose. The room emptied fast. Captain Kincaid stopped in front of her. "Sergeant Thorne," he said, voice clipped. "You're staying here, intelligence support only." She met his eyes, calm, respectful. "Yes, sir." She waited until he turned away before exhaling. Sometimes survival meant patience. Sometimes it meant disobedience. She didn't know yet which tonight would demand. Why did the alarm sound exactly 3 minutes before the watch rotation changed? The first explosion shook the ground hard enough to rattle teeth. Alexis was already moving. Screens lit up with chaos. Radio chatter fractured into overlapping panic. Vanguard was under attack, heavy, coordinated, brutal. RPGs, small arms, multiple vectors. Someone shouted that Overwatch was down. Another voice cut through the noise, raw with disbelief. "Snipers are KIA. Repeat, snipers are down." Alexis felt her stomach drop. She didn't think, thinking came later. She grabbed the rifle. Blood wasn't hers, but it slicked her gloves as she slammed the bolt home. The M24 felt familiar in her hands, like something remembered rather than learned. Her heartbeat tried to speed up. She forced it back down. Find the stillness. The bunker door burst open. Smoke, noise, men shouting into radios that no longer made sense. Captain Kincaid turned as she stepped into the firing port. "I'm your sniper," she said. The words landed like a slap. He stared. "That's not funny. Stand down. That's an order." She didn't argue. She dropped prone. Outside, the mountain breathed fire. Through the scope she found him, the enemy commander. Calm, controlled, directing death with hand signals. 800 yards away. Wind pushing hard, darkness swallowing detail. Impossible. She remembered her grandfather's voice, steady as snowfall. "You don't fight your body. You wait for it to stop fighting you." Her breathing slowed. Between heartbeats, the world went silent. She squeezed. The rifle kicked. The shot disappeared into the night. Then the commander fell. Just like that. No speech, no drama. One moment standing. The next gone. The attack unraveled fast after that. Confusion spread. Fire slackened. Fighters pulled back. When the noise finally faded, the bunker felt hollow. Captain Kincaid stared at her like she'd rewritten something he'd believed his entire life. "Who taught you to shoot like that?" Alexis lowered the rifle. "My grandfather," she said quietly, "and my father." Her hands were steady. She wondered when they'd start shaking. What do you do when the thing you've spent years suspecting suddenly bleeds into your hands? Morning came slow and pale. Bodies were counted, wounds wrapped, names written down for calls no one ever wanted to make. The mountain looked unchanged. It always did. Alexis helped where she could, quiet, focused. That's when she found the document. Folded, laminated, American. Movement orders, guard rotations, vulnerabilities classified. Her breath caught. This wasn't intercepted intel. This was betrayal. Someone had handed the enemy a map and said, "Here, kill them." Her father's face rose in her mind, uninvited. The investigation he'd been running. The questions that never stopped hurting. She showed the document to Chief Warrant Officer Dutch Garrison. Watched the color drain from his face. "This didn't start here," he said softly. "No," she replied. "It started years ago." And it hadn't stopped. That night, Alexis didn't sleep. She followed the threads. Financial anomalies, briefing access, patterns that screamed intent. 3 names surfaced. One stood above the rest. General Warren Blackwood. The man who had signed off on her father's final mission. The man who had closed the investigation after James Thorne died. Alexis leaned back, heart pounding, not with fear but with recognition. Truth had a weight. And once you lifted it, you couldn't put it down again. Why does the truth always ask for more than you think you can give? The mission to capture the arms dealer known as the Wraith was never supposed to include her. It did anyway. Because when things went wrong, and they always did, Alexis stopped listening to fear and started listening to necessity. The compound exploded into violence. Too many hostiles, too well prepared. Ambush. From Overwatch, she saw teammates fall, heard the panic sharpen into something close to despair. Orders came through her headset. Hold position. She didn't. She ran. Every step burned, every breath hurt, but pain was familiar. She moved through it like water, clearing rooms, pulling wounded to cover, firing only when she had to. She found the Wraith in the basement. He knew her name. He knew her father. And when he spoke, the last doubts inside her finally died. The evidence existed, proof, orders, signatures. Her father hadn't died in combat. He'd been executed. By men wearing the same uniform. They extracted under fire, lost good people, paid the price truth always demanded. When Blackwood tried to reclaim control, tried to bury the evidence the way he always had, Alexis understood something important. Systems don't protect people. People protect people. What does justice look like when it finally has nowhere left to hide? The embassy roof was blinding under the afternoon sun. Blackwood held a knife to a civilian's throat, desperate, cornered, still convinced he was untouchable. Alexis faced him across the open space. "My father believed in this country," she said. "You sold it." He laughed. She didn't. There was no rifle, no perfect position, only distance and consequence. 400 yards. A pistol. A gap measured in inches. She remembered every voice that had shaped her, every lesson earned in blood. Find the stillness. Between heartbeats she fired. The bullet flew true. Blackwood fell. The hostage lived. The truth followed. What remains when the noise finally fades? Winter at Arlington was quiet. Alexis stood between 2 headstones, one old, one far too new. Legacy wasn't about perfection. It was about continuation. Months later, she stood on a range, teaching others how to breathe through doubt, how to listen to themselves, how to understand that strength didn't announce itself. It simply acted. When her phone buzzed with news of another emerging threat, she didn't hesitate. Some missions never ended. Some warriors didn't need permission. And sometimes dignity didn't speak. It simply acted. Why did her hand stay steady when everything else was falling apart? The rifle rested against her shoulder like it belonged there. Not heavy, not foreign, familiar in a way that made her uneasy. Around her, the command bunker buzzed with the aftershock of survival, voices low, movements clipped, eyes darting toward exits that no longer felt secure. Men who had just accepted death were now trying to understand why they were still breathing. Alexis Thorne felt none of that relief yet. Relief came later, guilt came first. She replayed the moment in her mind, the squeeze, the recoil, the shape and the scope collapsing backward. She told herself she'd stopped a commander, disrupted an attack, saved lives. All of that was true, and none of it changed the weight now settling in her chest. Someone was dead because of her. Captain Kincaid approached slowly, as if sudden movement might break something fragile in the room. His expression had changed. Not admiration, not fear, something closer to recalibration. "You disobeyed a direct order," he said. "Yes, sir." "You picked up a weapon you weren't authorized to touch." "Yes, sir." "You made a shot that shouldn't exist." She met his eyes, but it did. Silence stretched between them. Around them, radios crackled with casualty reports. Names, statuses, the cost of minutes measured in blood. Kincaid exhaled through his nose. "We'll talk later." She nodded. She already knew what later meant. Reports, inquiries, explanations that never quite captured the truth. She also knew something else. Later assumed there would be time. Outside, the sky lightened. Morning crept over the mountains, indifferent to what had happened in the dark. Alexis stepped out of the bunker, needing air, needing distance from the smell of cordite and adrenaline. That's when she saw Dutch Garrison being loaded into a medical tent. Blood soaked through the bandage at his side. His face was pale, but his eyes were sharp when they found her. "Hell of a shot," he muttered. Her throat tightened. "You're hurt." "I've been worse," he said. Then quieter, "You kept your promise." She froze. "What promise?" Dutch studied her for a long moment. "The one you made without knowing it, the one your family always makes." She didn't answer. She couldn't. She turned away before he could see the shine in her eyes. Why did the evidence feel heavier than the rifle ever had? She found the document by accident. That's what she told herself anyway. The body lay near the outer perimeter, face turned away, hands stiff with cold. Enemy commander, the one she'd shot. Someone was cataloging effects, snapping photos for intelligence. Alexis knelt to help, methodical, distant. Then she unfolded the paper. Her breath caught, not because she didn't understand it, but because she did. Movement orders, guard rotations, vulnerabilities, detailed, precise, American formatting. This wasn't something intercepted. This was something handed over. The world narrowed to the sound of her own heartbeat. She folded the document carefully, like it might cut her if she moved too fast, and went straight to Dutch. He read it once, twice. Then he closed his eyes. "We need to be careful," he said. "No," she replied, "we need to be honest." His eyes opened, tired, old, full of things he'd carried too long. Honesty gets people killed. So does silence. That landed harder than she expected. Dutch nodded slowly. "You sound like your father." The words settled between them, heavy with implication. She didn't ask him to explain. She was afraid of the answer. Why did the patterns only make sense once she stopped hoping they would? Sleep never came. Alexis sat on her bunk, laptop balanced on her knees, the glow painting her face in pale blue. Data scrolled past, timestamps, call signs, patrol routes. To anyone else it looked like noise. To her, it was a confession. Ambushes happened within hours of classified briefings. Routes changed, but the enemy always knew. The leaks weren't random. They were consistent, intentional. She cross-referenced access logs, then financial records, then personnel histories. Her fingers slowed as 3 names surfaced. 2 were troubling. 1 was devastating. General Warren Blackwood. Her chest tightened, not with shock but with something colder. Recognition. A shape she'd circled for years without ever daring to fill in. Her father's last mission. The investigation that vanished. The way no one ever wanted to answer her questions directly. She leaned back, staring at the ceiling. This wasn't just corruption. This was execution. And suddenly, her shot on the mountain didn't feel like the beginning of something. It felt like the continuation of a war she'd been born into without consent. Why did doing the right thing feel so much like stepping into a trap? Captain Kinsinkade's office was quiet in the way rooms get when they're used for hard conversations. Maps on the wall, a single desk, no place to hide. "You should have come to me," he said after she finished. "With respect, sir," Alexis replied evenly, "I don't know who I can trust." He studied her, really studied her, not her rank, not her size, her resolve. "You're accusing a 3-star general." "I'm presenting patterns," she said. "The accusation comes later." He let out a slow breath. "If you're wrong." "I'm not." Confidence wasn't something she performed. It was something she'd earned. Kinsinkade drummed his fingers on the desk. "If you're right, this goes beyond you, beyond me. This dismantles careers, institutions." Truth usually does. A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. "Your father would have liked you." She swallowed. He deserved better. So did a lot of people. Why did the mission feel personal before she ever admitted it was? They called him the Wraith. An arms dealer who moved through borders like smoke, supplied weapons no insurgent should have had, a ghost everyone chased and no one caught. Intelligence finally pinned him to a compound near the border. Direct action, high risk. Alexis volunteered. The room went quiet. Kinsinkade didn't say no immediately. That hurt more than a flat refusal. "Overwatch only," he said finally. She nodded, took the position, told herself that was enough. It was. When the compound erupted into chaos, when she saw the team pinned down, outnumbered, bleeding, something inside her snapped cleanly into place. Orders crackled in her ear. She pulled the earpiece out. Running toward gunfire wasn't bravery, it was clarity, the moment when doubt finally ran out of room. She didn't think about rules, or consequences, or how this would look in a report. She thought about people. She thought about the cost of waiting. Why did the truth recognize her the moment she stepped into the room? The Wraith looked up when she entered the basement. Not afraid. Relieved. "Alexis Thorne," he said. Her name sounded strange in his mouth. "You knew my father." "I tried to save him." The words were quiet, honest, heavy. He told her everything about the investigation, the ambush, the order signed days before. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He offered proof. And in that moment, Alexis understood something that hurt more than any bullet ever could. Her father hadn't died because he was careless. He'd died because he was right. She straightened, the weight of 7 years settling into something solid. "You're coming with us," she said. "Good," he replied. "I'm done running." Why did it feel like the hardest part was still ahead? Extraction was chaos, loss, noise, smoke. They made it out, but not whole. As the helicopter lifted, Alexis looked down at the burning compound, at the space where answers had finally surfaced. This wasn't closure. It was responsibility. She checked the evidence again, the names, the signatures. Somewhere above them, A man with stars on his shoulders was already moving pieces to erase what she'd uncovered. She leaned back against the bulkhead, closed her eyes for one brief moment and breathed. Ignored, anxious, determined. She'd been all three. Now there was something else beneath it. Resolve. Because once you see the truth clearly enough, you don't get to look away. And she never would again. Why did the silence after extraction feel louder than the firefight itself? The helicopter cut through the night like it was trying to outrun something invisible. Wind hammered the open bay. The wounded lay strapped to the floor, eyes closed, faces gray with exhaustion and pain. No one spoke. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't sound fragile. Alexis sat with her back against the bulkhead, helmet resting in her lap, fingers still curled as if they remembered the shape of a weapon. Her ears rang, not from the noise but from the sudden absence of it. Combat had a way of filling every corner of your mind. When it stopped, the emptiness rushed in. She looked at the wraith across from her. He was cuffed, bruised, calm in a way that unsettled her. Most men like him begged, bargained, postured. He simply waited. She wondered how long he'd been carrying the same knowledge she now carried. How long he'd known the truth and survived by never speaking it aloud. The helicopter banked, the lights flickered. Alexis closed her eyes for a second and saw her father's handwriting. Tight, precise, the way he used to label her notebooks when she was a kid, the way he believed clarity was a form of respect. He would have hated how messy this was. Why did coming back feel harder than leaving? The base greeted them with controlled chaos. Medics moved fast. Officers asked questions no one could answer yet. Names were written down. Others were crossed out. Alexis handed over her rifle without ceremony. The armorer took it carefully, like it might still be warm. She stood there for a moment longer than necessary, empty-handed, unsure what to do with herself now that motion wasn't required. Eventually, she turned away and walked toward the operations building. Every step felt heavier than the last. Inside, the air was too still, too clean. Screens glowed with sanitized replays of violence stripped of sound and consequence. A junior analyst nodded at her, eyes wide with something like awe. She looked away. Awe made things smaller than they were. Captain Coincidental was waiting for her. "You disappeared from Overwatch," he said. "Yes, sir." "You ignored multiple direct orders." "Yes, sir." He studied her face, searching for something: remorse, defiance, justification. What he found instead seemed to unsettle him more. "I'd do it again," she said quietly, "given the same conditions." The words hung there, honest, unadorned. Coincidental leaned back in his chair. "That wasn't a question." "No," she replied, "but it was the truth." Silence followed, long, measured. Finally, he nodded once. "You're grounded pending review. Debrief in 2 hours. Get some rest." Rest? She almost smiled at the irony. Why did the truth refuse to stay buried once it had air? The debrief room felt colder than it should have. Alexis sat alone at the table, hands folded, eyes fixed on a small crack in the wall she hadn't noticed before. Cameras blinked red, recording, preserving, preparing to decide what this would become. The door opened. 2 men entered. One she recognized from briefings, civilian suit, intelligence oversight. The other made her chest tighten before she even fully processed his face. General Warren Blackwood. He looked exactly like he always had, impeccable, controlled, the kind of man who wore authority so long it became invisible. "Sergeant Thorne," he said warmly, "you've caused quite a stir." She didn't respond. He sat across from her, folding his hands on the table. "You disobeyed orders, compromised operational integrity, exposed classified assets." "And saved lives," she said. "Perhaps," he replied smoothly, "but that's not how institutions survive." There it was. Not denial, not confusion. Calculation. Alexis felt something inside her settle, the last fragment of doubt snapping cleanly into place. "I have evidence," she said. Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. "So you claim." She slid the file across the table. Movement order, financial trails, communications, signatures. Including his. The room changed. Not dramatically, not explosively, but subtly, like pressure shifting deep underground. Blackwood glanced at the documents once, then leaned back. "You're very brave." "No," Alexis replied. "I'm very tired." For the first time his expression faltered, just a fraction. "Your father," he said carefully, "was a good man, but he didn't understand the cost of idealism." "He understood it," she shot back. "He just refused to make other people pay it for him." Silence returned, thicker now. The man in the suit cleared his throat. "General, perhaps." "This conversation is over," Blackwood said sharply, standing. "Sergeant Thorne will remain under observation until we determine how much damage she's done." He paused at the door. "For what it's worth," he added, "you shoot very well." The door closed behind him. Alexis exhaled slowly. So this was the battlefield now. Why did waiting feel like the most dangerous part? They confined her to quarters. No phone, no access, no explanations. Officially, it was protocol. Unofficially, it was containment. Hours passed, then more. Alexis lay on her bunk, staring at the ceiling, counting breaths the way she did before long shots. In, out, slow, controlled. She thought about the men they'd lost, the ones whose names would be spoken softly for a while, then less and less. She thought about the ones who would never know how close they'd come to being erased quietly. And she thought about the ones who benefited from that erasure. Her door buzzed. Dutch Garrison stepped inside, closing it behind him. "They're moving," he said without preamble. "Blackwood." "Yes." She sat up. "How much time?" "Not much." He handed her a small drive. "What's this?" "Copies," he said, "of everything, distributed to people who don't like surprises." Alexis felt a flicker of something dangerously close to hope. "You shouldn't be here," she said. He shrugged carefully, pain flickering across his face. "I shouldn't have waited as long as I did, either." They shared a look, heavy with things neither could fix. "What happens now?" she asked. Dutch's mouth curved into a grim half-smile. "Now we see who blinks first." Why did justice always demand exposure before resolution? The hearing convened in a room designed to feel neutral. White walls, soft lighting, flags placed with deliberate symmetry. Nothing neutral ever happened in rooms like this. Alexis sat alone again. This time she wasn't cuffed. That felt intentional, a signal. Blackwood entered last. Cameras rolled. Testimony unfolded slowly, carefully, each question a probe, each answer a small risk. Alexis spoke plainly, no embellishment, no appeal to emotion. Facts had their own gravity. When the evidence was displayed, when patterns were laid bare instead of hidden in fragments, murmurs rippled through the room. Blackwood objected, deflected, redirected. But the cracks showed. The room shifted, not toward vindication but toward uncertainty. Institutions hated uncertainty. Alexis watched faces harden, others soften. This wasn't a victory. It was a fracture. And fractures, she knew, could either heal stronger or shatter completely. Why did survival feel less like relief and more like responsibility? That night Alexis stood alone outside, cold air burning her lungs. The stars were sharp, unconcerned. She felt empty, not broken, just hollowed out, like something had been removed and not yet replaced. Her phone buzzed. A single message. "Not over, be careful." She slipped the phone back into her pocket and looked up again. She had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. There would be consequences, retaliation, quiet attempts to discredit her, to isolate her. She knew that. And still, beneath the fatigue, beneath the ache, there was something steady. A sense that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Sometimes strength wasn't loud. Sometimes it was simply the refusal to stop, once the truth had your name on it. And Alexis Thorne had never been very good at walking away. Why did the threat feel closer now that everyone was pretending it didn't exist? The base woke up pretending nothing had changed. Flags rose, schedules posted, orders issued with practiced calm. Men and women moved with routine precision, laughing in low voices, trading small complaints about food and weather. On the surface, everything worked exactly the way it was designed to. Alexis could feel the strain beneath it. She walked through corridors where conversations stopped half a second too late. She caught glances that slid away the moment she met them. Not hostile, not supportive either, cautious, measuring. That was worse. She had become something unpredictable. Not a problem yet, but a possibility. And systems didn't fear enemies as much as they feared variables. Captain Kincaid called her into his office just after noon. He didn't offer a seat. "They're transferring you," he said. "Where?" she asked. "Nowhere operational. Training oversight temporary." A desk, a pause, a way to remove her without looking like removal. She nodded once. For how long? He hesitated. That was answer enough. "They're protecting the process," he added, almost apologetically. "They're protecting themselves," Alexis replied. Kincaid didn't disagree. As she turned to leave, he spoke again. "For what it's worth, you did the right thing." She stopped at the door, not looking back. "That's never been the question, sir." Outside, the sun was harsh, unforgiving. She welcomed it. Shadows were where people hid. Why did being sidelined hurt more than being shot at? The training facility was quiet in a way that felt artificial, controlled, safe. Alexis stood on the range, watching recruits cycle through drills she could have run in her sleep. She corrected posture, adjusted grip, reminded them to breathe. They listened. That surprised her. Some of them knew who she was. Some had heard the rumors. Others only saw the rank on her chest and the steadiness in her eyes. One young woman lingered after the session, helmet tucked under her arm. "Ma'am," she said, uncertain, "is it true about the mountain?" Alexis considered her carefully, the eagerness, the doubt, the hunger to believe in something solid. "It's true that you should trust your training," she said finally, "and question anyone who tells you not to." The recruit nodded slowly, like she was filing the answer away for later. Alexis watched her go, a quiet ache forming behind her ribs. She wasn't meant to be here. Not yet. Why did the past refuse to stay in the past once it sensed weakness? The message came through a secure channel she hadn't used in years. An old call sign, one she hadn't seen since her father's investigation went dark. "You're asking the wrong questions in the wrong order." She stared at the screen, pulse steady despite the sudden chill in her spine. Then she typed back, "Then tell me the right one." The reply came faster than she expected. "Who benefits from the delay?" Alexis leaned back, eyes closing briefly. Delay. Transfers, reviews, hearings stretched thin, evidence under evaluation. Time bought quietly, one procedural step at a time. Time allowed narratives to shift. She thought of Blackwood's face in the hearing room, not panicked, not angry. Patient. That frightened her more than any threat ever had. Why did the truth feel more fragile the closer it came to daylight? Dutch met her off base, in a place with too much noise and not enough privacy for listening devices to feel comfortable. A diner that smelled like oil and burned coffee. Perfect. He slid into the booth across from her, moving stiffly. "They're cleaning house," he said without preamble, "just not the way you'd expect." "Who?" she asked. "Anyone adjacent, analysts reassigned, officers retired early, careers ending quietly." Alexis frowned. "That doesn't protect Blackwood." Dutch's mouth twitched. "It does if the story becomes incompetence instead of conspiracy." She stared down at her untouched coffee. "They're turning this into a failure of process," she said, "not intent." "And failures don't need villains," Dutch replied, "just lessons learned." The words tasted bitter. "Who sent the message?" she asked. Dutch hesitated. That told her everything. "Still alive," she said. "For now." They sat in silence, the weight of it pressing in. "What happens if this disappears?" Alexis asked quietly. Dutch met her gaze. "Then your father disappears again, officially." Her jaw tightened. That wasn't going to happen. Why did the decision feel heavier than the risk? That night Alexis lay awake, staring at the ceiling she'd memorized by heart. She replayed everything, not the firefights, not the shots, but the moments in between, the choices no one wrote reports about. There was a line, she'd known it since the hearing. Crossing it would mean there was no quiet return, no rehabilitation arc, no neat ending. If she acted now, it wouldn't be sanctioned. It would be personal. She thought of the recruits on the range, of the young woman's question, of the expectation that strength followed permission. Her father had waited, trusted the system, believed that truth, once documented, would be enough. It hadn't been. Alexis sat up. Sometimes the mission changed. Sometimes the objective wasn't survival. It was exposure. Why did the quietest movements matter the most? She didn't steal the files. She accessed them. Old clearance, old trust, doors that hadn't been locked yet because no one thought they needed to be. Patterns emerged fast when you knew where to look. Blackwood's name appeared less frequently now, but the proxies remained. Shell decisions, advisory signatures, conversations rooted through layers designed to blur responsibility. Not erased. Distributed. Alexis copied everything. Then she did something her father never had. She sent it. Not to one oversight body, not to one journalist. To many. Simultaneously. All with the same timestamp. If they wanted to stop it, they'd have to stop all of it. At once. She leaned back in her chair as the progress bar filled. Heart steady, breathing slow. This wasn't adrenaline. It was resolve. Why did the fallout feel slower than the trigger pull? The first call came before dawn. Then another. By noon, her name was everywhere it hadn't been allowed to exist before. Official statements followed, carefully worded, non-committal. Then the leaks. Not hers. Theirs. Conflicting, defensive, rushed. Alexis watched from a distance, the way you watched weather roll in when you already knew it would break. Coincidental called her late that night. "They know it was you," he said. "I know," she replied. "You've burned every bridge." "No," she said gently. "I've exposed the ones that were never real." Silence stretched. "Be careful," he added finally. She smiled faintly. "I always am." Why did standing still suddenly feel like the bravest thing she'd ever done? They came for Blackwood quietly. Not with handcuffs, with statements, committees, temporary relief pending review. It wasn't justice yet. But it was movement. Alexis stood alone on the edge of the range at sunset, watching light fade from the targets. The wind was steady, predictable. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to feel tired. Not defeated. Just human. She thought of her father, not as a martyr, not as a cautionary tale, but as a man who had tried, who had believed action mattered even when outcome was uncertain. She understood him now in a way she never had before. Truth didn't always roar. Sometimes it endured. And endurance, she was learning, was its own kind of courage. Why did victory feel unfinished when the world finally started paying attention? The first official headline used words like review and irregularities. The second used allegations. By the third, the language sharpened into something closer to truth. Names appeared where there had only been shadows before. Connections were diagrammed. Questions were asked out loud instead of behind doors. Alexis watched it unfold from a distance she hadn't chosen. She had been placed on administrative leave, an elegant way of saying she was no longer useful in motion. Her access was gone, her badge deactivated, her rifle locked behind steel she was no longer allowed to touch. For the first time in years, there was nowhere she needed to be. That unsettled her more than danger ever had. She ran every morning until her lungs burned, the rhythm of her feet on pavement the only thing that made sense. She lifted weights until her muscles shook. She cleaned an already spotless apartment because stillness made her thoughts too loud. The world thought she'd done something brave. She wasn't sure bravery had anything to do with it. She had simply reached a point where silence felt heavier than consequence. Why did the people closest to the truth start pulling away first? Dutch stopped answering messages. Not abruptly, gradually, replies that took longer, calls that went unanswered, a distance that felt intentional, protective. She understood why. Proximity had become dangerous. Everyone who stood too close risked being labeled part of the same problem or the same solution. And solutions made people nervous. Captain Coincidental called once, just once. "They're carving this thing into pieces," he said. "No single narrative, no single villain." "They'll try to make it survivable," Alexis replied. "Yes," he said quietly, "for everyone except you." She didn't respond. There was nothing to defend. She had never expected protection. "They've offered you a deal," he added. "Quiet separation, honors intact, no charges, you walk away." Alexis closed her eyes. Walking away had never been the hard part. "What happens to the investigation?" she asked. Coincidental hesitated. "It continues, technically." She nodded once, "Then I don't need a deal." The line went quiet for a moment longer. "I wish you'd let me help more," he said. "You did," she replied, "when it mattered." After the call ended, Alexis sat in the silence it left behind. Sacrifice, she realized, wasn't about what you lost. It was about what you refused to reclaim. Why did the past demand a final reckoning just when the future seemed possible? The envelope arrived without warning, no return address, handwritten. Inside was a single photograph. Her father stood in front of a whiteboard, mid-sentence, marker in hand. He was smiling, not for the camera but at someone just out of frame, alive in a way she hadn't seen in years. A note was tucked behind it. He didn't regret it, not once. Alexis sat down slowly, the air leaving her chest. She had carried so many versions of him inside her, hero, victim, cautionary tale. None of them had included that smile, that quiet certainty. Tears came then, not sharp, not dramatic, just steady, honest. For the first time since the mountain, she let herself feel the full weight of grief she'd postponed in the name of duty. When it passed, something else remained. Peace. Not closure. Peace didn't need everything answered. It only needed alignment. Why did the final confrontation arrive without noise? They didn't put Blackwood on trial. They didn't need to. The resignation announcement came on a Tuesday afternoon, carefully worded, health reasons, service acknowledged, contributions praised. But the attachments mattered more than the headline. Emails, financial audits, testimony transcripts. Truth had a way of leaking through, even the most carefully sealed exits. Alexis watched the press conference alone, volume low. Blackwood stood at the podium composed as ever, older now, smaller. When a reporter asked about Colonel James Thorne, there was the briefest pause. A hesitation no one else would notice. Alexis did. That was enough. Justice, she understood now, didn't always arrive wearing the uniform you expected. Sometimes it came as erosion, as removal, as the slow dismantling of certainty. Blackwood stepped away from the microphone. And the world moved on. Why did rebuilding feel harder than breaking through? Weeks passed. The noise faded. New crises took over the news cycle. The public attention span shifted, as it always did. Alexis received offers she didn't want, speaking engagements, think tanks, positions that required words where she preferred actions. She turned them all down. Instead, she volunteered. Not publicly, not symbolically. She worked with families navigating loss without explanation, with soldiers transitioning out under circumstances they couldn't discuss, with young women who had been told, explicitly or otherwise, that there were limits to where they belonged. She never told her full story. She didn't need to. Presence was enough. One afternoon, the recruit from the range found her. The young woman looked older now, tired, sharper. "They said you left," she said. "I did," Alexis replied. "Did it break you?" Alexis considered the question carefully. "No," she said, "it clarified me." The recruit nodded, like that was the answer she'd hoped for. Why did the quiet finally feel earned? On a cold morning months later, Alexis returned to the mountains. Not the same place, close enough. She stood alone, wind pressing against her jacket, the vastness reminding her how small certainty always was. She thought about the shot, the documents, the waiting, the cost. She thought about how easily everything could have gone another way. And she thought about the people who would never know her name, but would live because of choices she'd made. That was enough. She placed the photograph of her father on a flat stone, weighed it down with another, and stepped back. "Still here," she said softly. The wind carried it away. Why did stepping forward feel like coming home instead of leaving? When she finally turned back toward the path, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "If you ever want back in, not the same way, but honestly, call me." She stared at it for a long moment. Then she slipped the phone back into her pocket and started walking. Some doors didn't need to be reopened. Some missions ended not with applause, but with understanding. And sometimes, the strongest thing a soldier could do wasn't to take the next shot, but to choose what kind of silence she was willing to live with. Why did the ending arrive so quietly when everything inside her expected noise? Alexis didn't hear the knock at first. She was standing at the kitchen window, watching rain trace thin paths down the glass, each one racing the others and losing in its own way. The city outside moved on, cars passing, lights changing, people unaware that a chapter had closed without ceremony. The knock came again, firm, patient. She opened the door to find Captain Coincidental standing there, no uniform this time. Just a coat, rain darkened at the shoulders, and a face that looked older than she remembered. "May I come in?" he asked. She stepped aside. He didn't look around, didn't comment on the sparsely furnished apartment or the boxes still half-packed. He stood where she indicated, hands clasped loosely, like someone who knew this conversation couldn't be rushed. "They finished," he said. Alexis nodded. She had known they would. Systems always finished things on their own terms. "Blackwood's name won't be spoken again in official rooms," Coincidental continued. "Not as a hero, not as a villain, just removed." She leaned against the counter. "And my father?" Coincidental met her eyes. His record was amended, quietly, Cause of death reclassified. Investigation reopened in full, then closed with findings entered into permanent archive. Permanent meant something in their world. He was right, Kincaid added, officially. Alexis exhaled slowly. She had imagined this moment 100 different ways, thought it might feel like vindication, or triumph, or relief sharp enough to sting. Instead, it felt like balance returning after a long lean. "That's all?" she asked. "That's everything," he replied. He hesitated at the door before leaving. "They won't ask you back the way they should have," he said, "but you changed how things will be handled. That matters." She nodded. "It does." After he left, the apartment felt larger, quieter. Not empty. Settled. Why did memory soften once it was no longer carrying unfinished weight? Alexis returned to Arlington on a morning so still it felt rehearsed. The air was crisp, the sky an unbroken blue that seemed almost inappropriate for the place. She stood between the two headstones again. Her father's name caught the light differently now. Clean, undeniable, no footnotes, no silence. She knelt and placed a small flag at its base, adjusting it until it stood straight. "I didn't fix it," she said softly, "but I stopped them from pretending it never happened." The wind moved through the trees like a held breath released. She stayed longer than she planned, not because she needed to say more, but because for the first time she didn't feel the urge to rush away. Some truths didn't demand constant defense once they were anchored. They simply existed. Why did the future arrive disguised as something ordinary? The call came weeks later. No classified line, no coded language. Just a woman's voice, calm and direct. "We're building something small," the voice said. "Advisory, training, oversight that answers sideways instead of up." Alexis listened without interrupting. "No politics," the woman continued. "No immunity, just accountability and preparation. We want people who understand the cost of silence." Alexis closed her eyes. "And if I say no?" she asked. "Then we still exist," the voice replied. "That's the point." After the call ended, Alexis sat on the floor with her back against the couch, letting the quiet settle around her. For the first time in a long time, choice didn't feel like a weapon. It felt like permission. Why did teaching feel heavier and more meaningful than fighting ever had? The training room was modest. No banners, no slogans, just space, equipment, and people who had arrived carrying questions they hadn't been allowed to ask before. Alexis stood at the front, not elevated, not framed as anything exceptional. "Strength isn't volume," she said, "and it isn't speed, it's control of breath, of fear, of when not to move." The room listened. Not because of her record, but because she spoke like someone who had learned the cost of every word. She corrected grips, adjusted posture, watched eyes sharpen as understanding replaced imitation. During a break, a young man approached her, nervous energy barely contained. "Ma'am," he said, "what do you do when the order feels wrong?" Alexis studied him carefully. "You ask yourself who carries the cost if you obey," she said. "Then you decide whether you're willing to carry it instead." He nodded slowly, absorbing something deeper than instruction. She recognized that look. It was the beginning of responsibility. Why did peace feel unfamiliar enough to require practice? Life settled into rhythms that didn't revolve around alerts or timelines. Alexis learned which grocery store was quietest in the evenings, which trail cleared her mind fastest, which hours of the day felt like her own. There were nights she still woke suddenly, heart racing, body braced for threat that wasn't there. She didn't fight those moments anymore. She let them pass. Healing, she realized, wasn't the absence of scars. It was learning when they no longer needed guarding. She kept the rifle locked away, cleaned regularly, not as a symbol of who she had been, but as acknowledgement of what had shaped her. Some tools earned rest. Why did legacy stop feeling like a burden once it became shared? One afternoon, the recruit from the range visited again. She stood straighter now, moved with confidence that hadn't been there before. "They put me in a leadership track," the young woman said. "I don't think that would have happened if you hadn't done what you did." Alexis smiled faintly. "You did the work." "Yes," the recruit replied, "but you showed me it was allowed." Allowed. The word stayed with Alexis long after the young woman left. Permission mattered. Representation mattered. But example, quiet, uncompromising example, mattered most of all. Why did the ending feel less like closure and more like continuity? On a clear evening, Alexis returned to the edge of the city where the lights thinned and the sky widened. She stood still, hands in her pockets, breathing in the space between things. She thought of the mountain, of the shot, of the choice no one had wanted her to make. She thought of her father not as a loss, but as a beginning. And she understood something that had taken years to form. Courage wasn't loud. Justice wasn't clean. And strength didn't always survive intact. But dignity, real dignity, endured. It acted when silence became complicity. It waited when patience served truth. And it stepped forward when no one asked it to. Alexis turned back toward the path, footsteps steady, unhurried. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't celebrated either. She was something rarer. She was resolved. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.